Hello everybody, my name is Oliver G. This is the Eiffel Tower podcast, and today I want to introduce you to Sarah Turnbull, who is an Australian author. She wrote a book I'm sure you've read, or maybe you've at least heard of, Almost French. Now this book came out 20 years ago. I remember reading it when it came out and it's sticking in my head. Who knows, maybe it planted the seed that would eventually lead me to Paris myself. And then I reread it when I moved to Paris and ended up living in almost the exact same block in the center of the second arrondissement that Sarah lived in her book. Now, I met with her in Sydney fairly recently, and we chatted. The idea was to chat about what you miss when you leave Paris for good, but it became kind of typical for Eiffel Tower episodes. It became a sprawling conversation about all things Paris, Rue Montorgueil, the whole concept of Paris being a city of contrasts. We talked about repatriation. We even talked about her new book, which I understand this might be the first you're going to hear of this new book from any channel anywhere in the world. It's about, I shouldn't give away too much. You should listen to the episode. But it's about a painter in France. I've said too much. This is probably one of the most unique Eiffel Tower podcast episodes I've recorded. We were sitting in a cafe in a suburb called Mosman, leafy green outdoor coffee shop where bush turkeys were interrupting our interview. I got a picture, you'll see it on social media, walking right past. There was a bug in Sarah's hair at some point. I didn't know if I should say anything about it. We were out in the wild, at least it felt like that for this city boy. I hope you enjoy the episode. I'll be back at the end for a brief rundown on the tour that I've just finished in Australia. Otherwise, thanks to the Patreon members for making this episode happen, and thank you to Press Maxon for the music you're about to hear. Here comes Sarah Turnbull on the Eiffel Tower. Take it away. Sarah Turnbull, how are you doing?
Really well. I mean, other than being a little bit sort of wet and bedraggled, I mean, the Sydney weather, I'm so sorry you've got.
This isn't what I was expecting.
I mean, I'm wearing gumboots.
Oh, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Let's paint the scene for people. You know, I said to my brother the other day, and he disagreed, but I said that Sydney always, for me, I think wet trees when I think of Sydney, and he said that's very unfair. What do you think?
Oh, look, I think that's a fair description now. Yeah. We haven't had a summer for a number of years. The weather's definitely changing. But no, I would have said in the past it was kind of blue skies, and for me, Sydney was, a great hemisphere of sky, of blue sky and water, and I guess that kind of association with Sydney, or that idea of Sydney, dictated where we moved when we came back. Right. We live on the northern beaches, which is in a place called Avalon, and there are lots of lovely beaches and cliffs, and the natural beauty is startling up there.
And that's funny because it's a long cry from Paris, where you just described, but not so much where we're sitting now. This Frenchy cafe, is it called? Frenchy's?
Yeah, Frenchy's. Look, it is a long... I mean, I think when we came back to Sydney, what we realised we wanted was the best that Sydney could offer, or what we felt, Sydney could offer, and that was the natural beauty. I think Paris is all about man-made beauty. And I know we're going to talk about this more, but I get so much inspiration and so much, energy from the natural beauty in Sydney. And in Paris, the man-made beauty and artistry used to give me so much energy.
Does it still give you energy when you go back?
Oh, I love it. And I miss it, actually. I miss that sense of walking out your front door and getting that, there were glorious monuments, but yes, it was also scruffy as well. I think one of the things I really miss about Paris is, for me, it's a city of contrasts. And so as much as there are glorious monuments, it's not just about that. It's not a postcard. It can be scruffy. The metro smells of pee. It can be staid and stately. It can also be provocative and extraordinarily modern. It's a city with so much history. It's an old city, but it's also new. So I think it's the tension between those contrasts that gives Paris its energy. And maybe it's that I miss, one of the things I miss anyway, that sense of, it's invigorating, I think, to be in that. And yes, and also that sense of, I guess, walking out your front door. We lived in the second arrondissement.
I want to talk about that in a second.
Yeah, the second arrondissement in Paris, which, so right in the thick of things. So when I stepped out my front door, I was in the thick of things on Rue Montorgueil, a busy kind of market street or pedestrian street. But also you just had that sense, in a short walk, you could be inspired, I guess, by all that man-made beauty and artistry and vision. You look at the Louvre, whether it's the Louvre or the Eiffel Tower or Empire's Pyramid at the Louvre. There's the scale of human vision, I think, is kind of before your eyes, and you're constantly reminded of it. And we don't have that in Sydney. It's the natural beauty that sings, and we've kind of...
Can you believe a bird started singing when you said that?
Yes, amazing. It did, on cue.
Yeah. You said the tension between the contrasts. Lovely way to put it. It's clear you're good with words. You're a writer. I want to talk about your book a little bit. Your books, but and also you mentioned what you miss about Paris. I want to talk about that. Second arrondissement, I want to talk about that. But first, I imagine a lot of the listeners to this show right now have read Almost French. A stunning 500,000 copies of it sold. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have read it who are Francophiles in this sort of community. I've read it twice, and it's very rare for me to interview an author whose book I've read twice. I don't think it's ever happened. I don't think I've read many books twice ever in my whole life. Because there's so many books out there, right?
Oh, thank you.
But I read it when I was in Australia before I had any intention or thought of moving to Paris. I remember reading it and being like, wow, this is so fantastic, this world, this story. Then I moved to the second arrondissement, and I lived just off Rue Montorgueil. And so when I reread it living there, it was a whole different book because I suddenly could relate to it.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, do you say where you used to live, or is that a secret? It wasn't in the book, the exact street?
No, so we lived on Rue Réaumur, and interestingly, so when I've been back obviously since, so it's now been quite a while since we left Paris in beginning of 2005, I think it was, or 2004. And I do think that area has changed. So when we first moved there, so we spent 10 years there, before we left Paris. And when we first moved, so many of our French friends said, oh, the second arrondissement, oh, you're moving to the Sentier. It wasn't Rue Montorgueil that was known, the Market Street, which is quite quaint. It was the Sentier quartier. It was the rag trade district. So, on Rue Réaumur was really the artery of that. I'd walk out my front door and there'd be guys wheeling racks of clothing, and it was, and I think from what I've seen, a brushed turkey's just...
I just want to explain what just happened, because some people around the world won't believe it. A brushed turkey
just hopped up behind us and just strolled along.
We could have touched it. This is the size of a turkey with it looks like it's got a Hawaiian lay around its neck, whatever that yellow thing is. I'll have to take a picture.
He's eyeing my croissant, actually.
We'll have to take a selfie with him later. Sorry, it was the main artery.
Yes, of that rag trade district. I may be wrong, but when I go back now, I see less of that. Maybe that sort of utilitarian sort of aspect, that really working quartier, some of that has gone and shifted out. In our building, in fact, the apartment where we lived, building, 3 of the floors were devoted to, rag trade businesses. So you heard the sewing machines going all day and the constant deliveries, the thump of rolls of fabric being delivered just sort of dropped on the floors, and the whole building would shake because they were really heavy. So I think there's less of that. It's a lot. It's a bit more glam.
Well, Rue Saint-Denis.
Yeah.
The one that's so. For anyone at home trying to picture it, Réaumur and Montaguet, two are the most difficult to pronounce in the whole of Paris.
They are! Montaguet, I had to practice it so many times.
It's lovely to walk down. But so if you're going down Montaguet and you turn right on Réaumur and then you turn right again, maybe the second right, Rue Saint-Denis has changed enormously in the past 5 years. It's cool, like it's really cool. It used to be, when I was there, which is 8 years ago, let's say, it was full of sex shops and
red light district, absolutely.
That's toned right down now, and it's cool new restaurants and cool new bars, and it's almost pedestrianized as well. So when you walk down it, it's got a whole different vibe. Like it's a cool place to be in a second, I'd say.
That's interesting. So there's that whole sort of... I mean, I guess it was inevitable. The centre of Paris was always going to become smarter, Certainly it wasn't smart when we first moved there. And so it's interesting going back and seeing the changes. But yes, we lived there and I loved it. I loved being in the thick of things. I love that activity happening all around. I wrote my book, Almost French, at the local cafe, one of the local cafes on Rue Montaguet. And
which one? Can we go back and find it?
Yeah, well, is it still there? Centreville, it was called.
I don't know off the top of my head.
And it was about in the centre of the street.
Okay, then guess where I used to live? Do you know Rue Greneta?
Yeah.
I was halfway down that.
Oh, wow.
So when I was reading your book, we must have almost been neighboured. Not at the same time, but and your descriptions of Rue Montaguet. And in that book you wrote, I remember it stuck out so much, you basically counted on the street, there's 2 bakeries and 8, I don't remember now because it's a while, but you described it so vividly, and I remember being like, oh, this has changed, that's changed, and it'd be interesting to see, because you can go on Google Street View and you can click the past versions of it. Did you know you can do that?
No, I didn't do that.
So if you look at that today, Rue Montaguet is a really good one to go down. In small print, top right, it says this is from 2021, let's say. And then you can click that and you can choose to see the last times that car drove down. So you can see it in 2015 maybe. You can see it in 2012, and you can see how much it continues to change. So that could be a good trip down memory lane.
Absolutely. Well, last time I was there, and this is going back, this is, pre-COVID. We have been back to France since, but I haven't been able to spend time in Paris. But last time I noticed there were a lot of sushi shops.
Yeah.
And that was new.
I had there's a sushi maybe, I don't know where you were on Réaumur. Were you near Montaguet as well, or were you a little bit further away?
So we were right next to a Monoprix, which is...
the beautiful one with the or was it an ugly one?
No, it wasn't that beautiful.
There's one on the corner of Sebastopol and Réaumur.
Oh, no.
It's the most beautiful supermarket in the universe, on the top.
Yes, I know that one. No, it's not that one. It was so we were right at the top of Rue Montaguet. Yeah. If you turned right onto Réaumur, we were about the second building along. Okay. So we were, just at that exit of Sentier...
Okay.
Metro.
The people who don't know the second arrondissement are very confused now, but the people who do know it are right into this course. But okay, so you were right in the thick of things. Yeah. In fact, if Paris was a dartboard, that's the bullseye, right where we're talking about. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how it's changed, because with COVID, you haven't been back since COVID?
Well, we have. We've actually just returned from a trip to Europe. But my father-in-law is not very well and he's elderly now. So, in fact, all our time was spent in the north of France. We went to Italy, but we didn't, unfortunately, we couldn't spend time in Paris. So that we're saving that for a big trip in 2024.
Olympics.
I know, you told me about that. Well, we'll plan around that so we don't. But yeah, look, it was. So unfortunately, I can't give any sort of update on Rue Montaguet.
No, but I can tell you one thing that's interesting with COVID is that a lot of the places that were really struggling, have closed down because they were already on their last breath for whatever. Yeah. I mean, anything, whether it's a fabric store or a cafe or whatever, anything that wasn't quite making it, it was easy to give up, and so. I noticed this in Montmartre as well, a lot. And so a lot of new young people have come in and trying new restaurants and cafes and stuff. So there's a vibrancy in some areas that wasn't there before. So a lot of people are lamenting when they're coming back to Paris nowadays, because I'm meeting a lot of people in Paris at the moment, that their favorite places have gone. But at the same time, I like to say there's a tension between the contrasts of the new and the old. That's what I like to say now.
Yeah, and maybe there's a new energy. I mean, obviously terrifically hard for the businesses across the world that, we saw the same things here where so many businesses closing, and it was not taking anything away from that. But yes, there is a new... I can imagine in Paris, because we're seeing it here as well, there's also a new life and people sort of wanting to create new ventures.
I'm interested, like you said, you're talking about the thump of the deliveries and the rag trade, which I don't know if that sounds romantic to people at home, but I know there's definitely a sort of romance in it. You're like in the old, the old Paris that people have written about for forever, and
when you're trying to write as a journalist and
and you're at the start of your book, didn't you? The start of your book is like, as a journalist, it was hard for me to start talking in the first person. That's what you wrote, right?
Yeah, sorry, no, but I was going to say, when you're trying to write and you've got all these the noise, it wasn't actually particularly romantic. But yes, I know what you mean. I actually did love the sense of activity that came with that. I did, and I guess there was a sense of purpose. All these, mainly guys wheeling these, the clothes and these racks of clothing. Sometimes you'd find a pair of jeans on in between the third floor and the second floor that someone had dropped, and or a dress that's come off a rail. All this. There were always sequins in the stairwell because they were already falling off the dresses. So it was. I don't know whether romantic is the right word, but it was certainly vivid.
Right. Well, I mean. What I'm curious to hear your take on is, it's easy as a writer to describe something as vivid or romantic or beautiful or interesting, and especially with the world has such an appetite for Paris and France, and that continues to grow perhaps. But when you move to Sydney, and I don't know exactly, you describe where you live, but I imagine you've got a garden and peace and quiet. Do you find that you're actually missing those parts of Paris that were so big part of your life? Or are you kind of like, glad that chapter's over, made for a nice story, but I don't want to be in that kind of thing anymore. I don't want, like, when you go back to Paris, do you want to go back and see that kind of life, or do you want to stay in a nice hotel? Look,
I would say it's neither one of those things, because I think it's more, when we moved back to Australia, we both... Fred, I'm still with Fred, who's in my book,
Frédéric.
Yeah, Frédéric, sorry.
Double R.
Who's called by everyone in Australia, either Fred or Freddie. Yeah. So no one tries a double R, but including me. But when we moved back here, we were really conscious of the fact, you can't have everything. Paris is Paris. We're going to miss those aspects that we loved. And I think the challenge when you do love two places or more, and you have sort of more than one home or place that feels like a home, is to be wholly in that life at that time. So not spend your time longing or being too nostalgic. That's not to say that we've forgotten and cut ourselves off from that part of our life. It's such an important part of it. It's shaped me, who I am. It shaped my experiences and my perception of Australia when I moved back. But I think, we really made a conscious decision. We are here. Sydney is not Paris. Let's enjoy Sydney for what it is, and be wholly in this life.
And when you say wholly, you mean WHOLLY?
Yes, yes, completely. And the funny thing is, we've got one child, a son, Oliver, and
great name.
Yeah, and he's now 16, and he. So he was born, another story, but he was born in Tahiti, which is where we moved after Paris. We spent 3.5 years there. And so by the time we moved back to Australia, he was 1.5, I think. And when we moved back to Australia, because it had been 15 years since I lived here, we decided that to get to know Australia, we wanted to see it. And it would be a discovery for Fred to go on a big trip around Australia, and also for me, because it'd been so long since I'd been out of my country. So we did the completely irresponsible, mad thing. Neither of us had work. We bought a tiny caravan. Our son Oliver was a year and a half. Our friends kept saying, "You're mad. You're going to go in that tiny, tiny caravan with these sort of wings, like tent flaps that flapped out from either side, which were our beds at night." Yeah. Fred called it Chateau Pliant, fold up a castle. And we spent 10 months going around Australia and stopping at all sorts of places we never thought we'd stop. And the hilarious thing on this trip was the trip became, it wasn't our plan, but it became entirely dictated by the places where we could get Oliver into a childcare centre.
Wow.
So we spent like 3 weeks in Kalgoorlie because there was this great childcare centre.
With the idea being you could leave him during the day and explore. Okay,
and he was so happy because he was so sick of it.
Wow.
And we needed a break. And it was, so that was our 10 months around Australia. And it was actually a great way to... to see parts of Australia I'd never seen, but also to rediscover my country.
Well, it's funny because that's a whole extra topic that we could delve into maybe one day, of returning, repatriating.
Yeah.
Is that the word? I guess that's the word. And seeing your own country especially after Paris, because I know a lot of listeners to this show have lived in Paris or spent a lot of time in Paris, and then how that can change your perception of what you call home or what is home. Fascinating. Also fascinating, to a smaller degree, but the similarities. We were both journalists, both moved to Second Arrondissement, both lived a life with a European in Paris, both found ourselves in Australia with a 1.5-year-old baby, and an Oliver in a car, and a road trip. The similarities.
That is funny. That is very
Where will it
spooky.
end? Yeah. I'm just copying your life story, I think. One thing that we mentioned before, Frenchy's Cafe. We're not sponsored by him or anything, but I'm curious for your take on Paris and France in Australia. I've noticed that there seem to be a lot of French shops and restaurants.
Absolutely.
Even a few patisseries around the place. Do they sort of feed a hunger that you have? Do you find that they're a bit like knockoff? Do you think that there's a...
Oh, I love them. Look, one of my favourite restaurants, it's a local, it's Bistro Boulevard in Avalon, and it's run by a French-Australian couple, and it's just terrific. We go there for our steak frites, and it's added so much to... it's always full. You know, I think you're absolutely right. There's a. I think for a lot of Australians, it's not just if you've lived in Paris or France. I think a lot of Australians love French culture. They love that kind of French food, French. And also the sort of atmosphere that you get, whether it's a French cafe like this one, or a bistro like the one, which is a really authentic. It could be in Paris, the bistro near us, and there are others across Sydney. And I think more are opening. Actually, I think in recent years, a lot of those restaurants have done very well, and part of it is what they do well. So it might be a simple menu, but they're doing it well. And the other thing is, I think a lot of French places are really good at atmosphere. They're really good at lighting. You know, and a lot of Australian restaurants aren't necessarily. They tend to be quite white, stark. The lighting can be quite bright, and that's exactly the opposite to the French bistro with candles on the table, or a French cafe. So I think a lot of people like that.
I wonder if that's responsible, not just in Australia but in America as well. French people and other countries, French people going abroad and sort of introducing their trade, restaurants and patisseries and stuff, and getting people into this dream of, I want to be in Paris, and going to see it for themselves.
Yep.
Interesting.
Look, and I think there's a really active French community in Sydney as well, and very enterprising, and that's probably around the world. But
all the waiters here are French. And a little story that I mentioned to you already, but for the people at home, when I was buying my coffee just now, the waiter just looked up at me and he said, "Vous êtes français?" And I was like, how did he figure that? Well, I'm not, but how did he figure that out? And I said, no, but I live in Paris. How did you get that? And he said, I saw the carte vitale, the what do you call it, the healthcare card in your wallet. And I was like, oh, very well played.
And I think you could pass, even without seeing the card, I think you could pass as Parisian.
Oh, well, there you go. I've been there too long, maybe. I don't know.
Which no one has ever said to me, I have to say.
Do people, you've got an interesting profile in that. When did Almost French come out?
So that was in Australia. It was, I think, 2002, and America 2003.
Okay, and so that came out, and it was a success. Everyone was talking about it. You did a tour. You went to America.
It was a huge surprise.
Really?
I have to say.
Well, was it one of the? I was trying to figure out. I know people have been writing about Paris since. I always say since Julius Caesar kept a diary about his trip 2,000 years ago, but. Like, when you wrote that book, were there many other stranger in a strange land, woman in Paris kind of stories around?
Look, actually, I think there weren't. I mean, when I first got the idea of writing, it actually wasn't my idea for a start. It was my mother and Fred who kept saying, oh, some of these stories, some of your experiences as a journalist, you should be writing them down. And because I was, at that point, I was set up as a freelance journalist. I was doing a lot of work for Australian magazines, whether they be food magazines, weekend paper magazines, Marie Claire, Australia, all that sort of. So I was interviewing a lot of, whether it be chefs or fashion designers, and also covering politics in France. So it was very varied, and plus I had my personal experience as a. I was very resistant to the idea because I just thought, no, there's enough of, there's a year in Provence, and then there was something about Italy, and I don't know, I just couldn't really see it. And I used to go to W.H. Smith there and look at all those kind of books and think, well, what do I have to add? And of course, there was something to add because I was writing about Paris for a start, so I didn't want to write about doing up a house in the countryside. I realised over time, okay, this is what I am going to do. I'm going to write a book about Paris that tells it how it is, at least for me, because we all have different experiences. And I completely understand and accept that someone else's life in Paris is not mine. But I thought I would write about my experiences. Initially, it was going to be very, very journalistic. So when I sent my first 3 sample chapters off to the publisher, they came back to me and said, oh, this is really interesting, but unless you're willing to put yourself in it, there is no story. So in those sample chapters, I think I'd referred to Fred, who was the whole reason I went to Paris, to live with him, and we'd started this romance. I'd mentioned him twice as the lawyer, which he hated. If there's one thing he didn't like being called, it was the lawyer. And so, and anyone who knows Almost French, the book, knows that he is an essential part of that book, and it is a personal book.
But that's the thing, I guess and I started to talk about your profile. It seems you're quite a private person. In that, and then to write a memoir that's successful must be quite a trip.
It was.
Yeah.
Well, actually, once I got into the writing of it, I really enjoyed it, and I just got so lost in the writing, and I had fun. I think the challenge was the success of the book. And I say that knowing how bloody lucky I am that it was a success. That was so fortunate, and really so many good books get published which deserve success and then they don't get it. So, but I wasn't prepared for it. The publisher didn't think it was going to be a big hit. They thought it would be, they said they were hoping for it to sell about 5,000 copies. Right. Within a few months, it had sold several 100,000 copies.
Incredible. I love it.
It was on the bestseller list in Australia for 9 months.
Really?
So no one expected it, least of all me, and no one had kind of prepared me or said...
I'm going to get the insect out of your
Oh,
hair.
yeah,
An Australian bush interview. I love it. Okay.
As long as it's not a funnel web. But yeah, so actually, as a private person, I know I'd written the book and I was totally responsible for it, but I was so taken back, I kind of retreated into a shell then. And if I have one little regret, but it's just all about growing up, isn't it? It's that I didn't enjoy that success enough. I sort of felt a bit embarrassed.
Well, I wonder, because if that had been today, the publisher would have put a gun to your head and said, you better get on Instagram and be a personality, because I assume, I don't know, but it would have been really different with the social media angle that,
Totally.
Because that's how they push the book as well, like, your tour and everything. And that brings me to, you're on Instagram now, and you've been writing again. It must be weird for you to be sharing, your private life and your private pictures as an author with a memoir out and another book coming out.
Look, I think I've relaxed a little bit about that. As I said, I look back and I think, you should have enjoyed that a bit more. You should have felt a bit pleased or a bit proud, and instead of, and there were moments of great joy. Don't get me wrong. And there was some hilarious moments actually. I do remember walking down Rue Montagueux, and it was probably about a year after the book had come out, and I was with my dog, my then West Highland Terrier Maddie, who was also a big part of the book. And I was in. I was really not dressed up at all, but I think I was in tracksuit pants or something, And I heard this voice behind me, an Australian voice, call out, and it wasn't, "Are you Sarah Turnbull?" It was, "Is that Maddie?"
Really? That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, I think they put
and your dog gets recognised on the street. Oh.
And they later explained, we put two and two together. We saw you, a woman in tracksuit pants with a West Highland Terrier. So not necessarily flattering, but it was very funny, and we had a lovely conversation. But so there were moments, plenty of moments like that that I did enjoy. But yeah, I think in terms of being I still am, as I said, we've got a son. I have written in my second book, which is All Good Things, I wrote about the difficulty we had having a child, and...
Even more private.
Even more private.
Yeah. What's the next book going to be about? How deep are we going?
The next book is actually a novel. There is a French, so I've just finished, I've got to do another draft of it. I've just recently finished.
Is this the first interview you're doing since you finished the draft?
Yes.
Okay, what's the book? Tell me everything.
So I won't give you the title because the title will change.
Okay, yeah.
But it is a novel. It's a work of biofiction, which means it's based on... it's a work of fiction, but based on a real-life person. And that person is an Australian artist, an impressionist artist, John Russell, who
I know exactly who that is.
Do you? Who lived in France?
At the island... Monet...
Belle-Île.
Yeah. And he was involved with Monet and Rodin.
Absolutely.
Yeah? He had the same muse or something like that?
He married Mariana Maticci. Sorry, my Italian...
No, we can try.
Or whatever.
Maticciato.
Yeah, well, something that sounds like macchiato, but anyway. But so he married this beautiful young Italian woman. They had this incredible lovers affair. They lived for 20... They moved from Paris, where he was an art student, to Belle-Île, lived there very happily for 20 years, had an enormous number of children, and then she tragically died at the age of 42, Mariana, from cancer, it appears. And as a result of that, he burnt a large number of his paintings.
That's right. And there was...
in his grief.
And I feel like I read that Monet or Rodin heaped praise on him as one of the best.
He was great friends with Rodin.
Okay.
So he knew Monet. They had this chance, incredible meeting on Belle-Île at a time when Belle-Île was not at all a tourist attraction. People didn't go there. So it was extraordinary that these two Parisian artists in 1885 met on the wild, called the Côte Sauvage of the island, and They certainly spent quite a bit of time together on the island, but Rodin was a very close friend of Russell. Russell also tutored Matisse.
There you go.
On Bali. And so
in Impressionism, then?
No, in colour. So by then, well, I guess, so that was 1895, 96, 97. Matisse came...
A young Matisse, then, I assume.
A young Matisse.
An impressionable Matisse.
Who was a conservative artist at that stage. If you look at the paintings Matisse did on Belle-Île at that time, and during those 3 consecutive trips over summer, he was doing polite, silvery, grey landscapes.
Right.
And so the great Matisse biographer Hilary Sprawling credits Russell as... introducing Matisse to colour and vibrant colour, and he also gave Matisse, which was quite a really big thing, he gave Matisse one of the drawings that Vincent van Gogh had given Russell. So Vincent van Gogh and Russell were great friends.
Wow.
Russell had 12 drawings sent to him by Vincent, by post, and he gave one of them to Matisse. So we obviously thought this young guy had something, otherwise he wouldn't have done that. And
how fascinating. I'm going to buy the first copy.
Oh,
How? When will it be ready?
Well, okay, so just hold tight.
Okay.
It's not, so there's another draft to do.
Okay.
But it's a subject I discovered as a journalist, or came across as a journalist, so many years ago when I was living in Paris.
Right.
And it's a story that had always played on my mind, and it took years and years for me to actually sort of think of doing something about it.
But when you said, I missed what you said before. You said like it's like it's about his life, or it's like, is it fictionalized?
So so it's a work of what they call biofiction. Biofiction or biographical novel, which means it's based on the real life of someone, but it is a work of fiction.
Okay,
so
you add what...
There are lots of gaps in his life, and so to make it... So I've done an enormous amount of research. I've been to the island many times.
I was just about to ask that.
I took part in helped on a documentary actually that was screened on ABC TV in Australia.
I feel maybe that's how I know about it. Someone maybe sent that to me, or maybe I feel like I don't know how I know about this, because I'd say most people don't know about this guy, right?
Yeah. Look, more Australians are starting to... There was a big... I think you're right. Yes, a lot of people don't know about him. And certainly among Australian artists, he's not like a Tom Roberts or an Arthur Streeton. You know, one of the really big-name Australian artists. John Russell never has had that recognition factor. But
Yet.
And there was the documentary, certainly, which was done by a friend, Catherine Hunter, who took me and several contemporary Australian artists and the curator, Wayne Tunnicliffe, at the New South Wales Art Gallery. We all went to Belle-Île to film this documentary. It sort of sounds like an Agatha Christie thing, doesn't it? The curator, the author, the artist.
Yeah. Who died? John Russell.
Yes. Okay. But it was, and we all rented a house. And the funny thing was, we ended up renting the very house that Matisse stayed in.
Wow.
When he stayed on the island.
And Matisse himself is an interesting character. Good gracious me.
Yeah.
This is a world worth exploring. This, I think, because Monet also painted Belle-Île a fair bit, I think.
Yeah.
And I think I've always had this, I've been saying it, that I want to do a writing retreat on a hotel on a cliff there looking out over the stormy sea. It's like a dream of mine. That's how I want to finish my next book, is out there. Did you say something like that?
So I actually rented a little house. So, for the documentary, we were all in the one house. Yeah. But when I went there on my own, I actually rented a little house in a hamlet, which was the closest place, this hamlet, Envague, it's called, Envague. And it's basically the closest you can get little settlement that you can get to the wild coast, the Côte Sauvage.
I'm going to have to take your details down for that one.
It was fantastic, and I loved it. And the Belle-Îlois, who the landlord, they were just so kind. I loved that island. Russell's house is no longer there. It was knocked down in the 70s, and actually in its place now is a spa hotel therapy, place.
Would it make a good weekend trip from Paris?
I think you need a bit more than a weekend.
Okay.
I
A whole
think-
retreat then. Okay.
Yeah.
You sold me.
Give yourself a bit longer, but look, I loved it, and I also love it's such a dramatic coastline. That wild coast, as it's called, is the southwest coast, I think it is just extraordinarily beautiful. Beautiful walks, and it was fabulous also going there with the artists, Ewan MacLeod and Luke Skabiris, who are big-name Australian contemporary landscape artists, and seeing how they painted this island that Russell painted so many years, and Monet and so many others.
I love it. It's something to look forward to. For people who are interested in following along on your journey, and you're going to be sharing more stuff on Instagram, am I
Yes. Oh, look, I can see that's a little dig. Like, get going,
It's
Sarah.
a gentle dig, but also we can
no,
thank
you're right.
Instagram because I didn't know you lived in Sydney, but you commented "Welcome to Sydney," and it's because of that we are sitting here now. So I'm so glad you have it because it's such an easy way to back and forth with
Absolutely.
people.
Oh, no, there's so many wonderful things.
But how did we find you on Instagram?
Sarah Turnbull, author.
And I will write that in the show notes so you can all click and say hello to Sarah and how much you enjoyed her chatting with us here on the Eiffel Tower. But that's exactly what I want to say. Sarah, it was such a pleasure on such a wide-ranging... I don't know how much we talked about missing Paris, but we really went up and down the whole spectrum of it all there. So thanks for taking the time to meet. Well done on everything you've done. I'm a fan.
Thank you, Oliver. And look, well done you, because it's not every, loads of people have that plan and a dream of doing a podcast, and you've made it into a success. And I was saying to you before, and it was absolutely sincere, I first heard about you or came across you on Instagram. I clicked on one of your posts and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I thought it was a fresh take on Paris. So well done you.
Thank you very much. Now I can put a fresh take on Paris on the back of my next book. Thanks, Sarah. You're so kind. And until next time in Sydney or maybe in Paris, à bientôt. Merci beaucoup.
À bientôt. Merci à toi.
That'll do for now. As I said, Sarah Turnbull, her new book sounds fascinating. Get it when it comes out. Otherwise, read Almost French and be sure to encourage her on social media, Sarah Turnbull, author. As for me, I'm Oliver G. The tour that I just completed with my wife and son, we started in Brisbane on the coast of Australia, the east coast, drove 2,500 kilometers all the way to Melbourne, and we met so many of you lovely listeners and readers. It was such a treat. I want to say thank you to all the VIPs, the MVPs. You know who you are, the people who put in the time, the calls, the effort, also the logistical help. For you guys, I think you know who you are. Thank you very much. And also a thank you to everybody outside of Australia who had to put up with a bit of Aussie content on social media for a whole month. Me, now I'm in an airport hotel in Melbourne, about to fly to Paris, so by the time you hear these words, I'm probably back in the City of Lights, and I'm ready to share it all with you as usual. As I said in the intro, a big thanks to the Patreon members. If you like this show, tell your friends or leave a review, but if you love it, become a Patreon member to keep these wheels spinning. Patreon.com/The Eiffel Tower, where a monthly fee will unlock a world of extra Paris content, including the recent update to our travel guide in Paris. PDF, can't miss it. Check it out. My name's Oliver G. This has been the Eiffel Tower. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Sarah Turnbull for being on the show. And have a lovely week wherever you are. Merci beaucoup and au revoir.